Welcome everybody to the last AIN networking workshop of the semester. Today we have Lori Goldstein, who's part of the Arrowhead staff. She's our technical writer, and today she's going to do a workshop on storytelling ideas.
Thanks for coming out. I know it's one of those Las Cruces windy days, so thank you for your time first. And hi, come on in. So story as data. When I was preparing this time, I just read a study that was published, a scientific study that was published in November 2016 that used big data to analyze 1,700 stories. And they were kind of, it's interesting, they came up with 6 narrative arcs that are consistent throughout kind of mankind, throughout all time, throughout all stories. And it's funny because it's the same narrative arcs that Kurt Vonnegut identified in the 70s. So science has confirmed what the storytellers have already kind of picked up on. Here's my information and my website, and I have business cards up here too afterwards for those of you who want to keep in touch. I'm here 5 days a week, so I'm always available, and always available late in the night. This project started, my background, let me introduce myself first, please. I did my PhD here, finished in 2015, December 2015, rhetoric and professional communication, which is in the English department. I did my MFA in creative writing at Virginia Tech, that graduated in 2008, and I recently ran this workshop, like last month, ran this workshop at Virginia Tech, and at Purdue. And I did my undergraduate at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska, so I have several English degrees, and I've managed to end up in business, which is really fun. So here, creating, so this comes out of actually Bootcamp Bootleg, which is a publication by the Stanford D-School, Stanford Institute of Design, and they use design thinking. Estella runs a workshop on design thinking, and they use the journey, what's called a journey map. And a journey map generally charts the life of a product, the journey of a product from start to finish. And in my dissertation work, I took that idea and integrated it into my strange patchwork poet, researcher, technical writer, grant writer background, and adapted it for this presentation. So there's two concepts of time that we'll use in this workshop, and they both come from the ancient Greeks. First is kairos, and kairos is a more holistic view of time. Kairos is cosmic time, it's the opportune time. It's generally when things come together and transpire and push action or direction, push action in a certain direction. Examples of kairos moments would be anything that is pivotal, and it can be large or small, and I'll use an example in a moment. How many of you have seen the documentary Searching for Sugar Man about the singer Rodriguez? I highly recommend it. And I'll come back to Rodriguez in a second. Chronos time is seconds, minutes, hours, days, months, weeks. Linear, very human concept of time, that traditional idea of time. Kairos, the opportune moments, is what we're going to map today. I want to express that this is an iterative process, and to trust your decision making when you're mapping. It's very associative, and when I presented to mostly graduate students, I told them a lot of times, especially as graduate students, we start to question if we make a decision quickly. I think that's a human thing too. If we make a quick decision, it's like, okay, I made a snap decision. In this process, just trust your thinking, trust your associative thinking in the iterative process. So back to an example of kairos. So Rodriguez was a singer in the 1970s, along the lines of Bob Dylan, in that general genre. He did not know that he became famous. He largely did not become famous in the States. Nobody knew who he was. I mean, nobody knew who he was. He found out much later that he had become bigger than Elvis in South Africa, and had no idea. This was pre-internet, and because of apartheid, his messages and his songs were a chaotic moment for the people of South Africa, and they really held on to his lyrics. It was all underground. Nobody would publish or import his records, so it was all bootleg. It was all bootleg copies, and it really shaped the lives of South Africans. There was a story that came out that he had committed suicide, and it largely affected the South African population who followed his music. Meanwhile, he doesn't know any of this is going on while he's in the States. His record producers come on the film and the documentary and they say, we don't know, we tried everything. By all means, he should have been a huge success. All the marketing was right, the music is amazing, there's no reason that he should not have connected with an American audience. But he didn't, not a Kairos moment. So those moments in our lives where things don't come together is kind of the opposite of Kairos. But what happens is, in this very small kairotic moment, a researcher in Cape Town puts in the liner notes of the CD, if anyone knows how to get a hold of Rodriguez, I need a musicologist on the case. A musicologist in the States happens to be reading the liner notes and says, oh my gosh, I think I'm the only person in America who knows who Rodriguez is. This is a sign. So from that moment where the musicologist finds that little tiny sentence in a liner note, everything flips the other way. And it's a series of kairotic moments. All the way, hands up, well, I won't go to the end of it. But there's this series of things coming together after a long, years and years and years of things not coming together. The kind of as a meta kairotic moment, the documentary won Best Picture, won an Oscar. So it ended up being Kairos for many people involved and productive for many people involved. So you can see that if you're, documentaries use storytelling arcs, narrative, well, whether we're talking about fiction, nonfiction, we have those storytelling arcs. So what we'll do today is we're going to start, and I borrowed this actually. I use all available means, so I actually kind of stole this from my therapist. But it's a psychology too. Above the line and below the line. And I use this as a mapping tool. Above the line is your more positive Kairos moments, things that are, and I'll show you my map in a moment. You have things that are pushing you forward in a positive direction, or things that came together and really produced something positive. Getting hired here, not because my boss is sitting here. I did do a map, I did do a complete map. I've done this several times, I always do it with the workshop. So I did one completely of my time at Arrowhead so far. Luckily, everything except one thing was above the line. I have done, the last time I did it at Purdue, I ended up mapping, I've always wanted to tell the story of, I've been a dog sitter since I was 18 and also always thought I would give up that side hustle and kind of haven't ever managed to give it up completely. So I thought I have all these stories of dog sitting, I've never done anything with them. So I thought, well, that'd be kind of a cool thing to map. So I did an entire map of my experience dog sitting, tons of below the lines, and tons of above the line, and tons on the line. So you can really map any, if you have a specific project in mind, keep that project in mind as you're working. If you don't have it, if you came to the workshop, you don't really have a specific project in mind, think of the context of yourself as a problem solver and start from there. I used that in a class once, and it's something that everybody is. You guys all problem solve to get here today. It's a good way to start in that. The below the line generally are going to be a little bit more negative, and they're going to be pivot moments. And sometimes it's something that you don't realize at the moment that has pushed you. It might have been something really kind of terrible that pushed you in a different direction. So here's my safe for public consumption map. I went through two more, and that's the other thing too. You're not going to be sharing these, nor probably in your story will you include all of them. So what you include on your map is just a private map that you can use. So here we have, for instance, at the top, I have things like reading, for any scholars in here, reading Judith Butler for the first time in Monica Torres's class, and reading Eve Sedgwick, Epistemology of the Closet. That was one of my, I think this is kind of mapping grad school experience. I have Moni herself in there, as she used to give these, she introduced us to this capital T idea of truth and little t idea of truth, which I think I can't explain here, and I don't quite have a grasp on, but maybe that's the point. I had speaking of dog sitting, I dog sat for my entire committee. So all 4 of my committee members, I had dog sat for them. I have a phone call, and notice when they get close to the line, this one is a phone call with my, I wouldn't be standing here had I not had this phone call. I wanted to, I don't know, I got on a kick of reading narratives of people who had dropped out of grad school and how wonderful it was. And I decided that I was like, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. I called her standing in the middle of, I was dog sitting for someone, standing in the middle of their kitchen. Hi. Talking to my mentor from Virginia Tech, and she said, I don't think you want to do that, Lauren. You don't really want to drop off. And she's like, I mean, it wasn't even a very long phone call. And I thought, no, I probably don't. Another one that lands on the line is my outside committee member said, I prepared this huge proposal, and nobody, you guys would have laughed at the proposal. It was like 25 pages of, pretty much I just started writing my dissertation and called it the proposal. I was a little misguided on what I was doing, and they all and I thought it was brilliant. I put it in front of them, and they all looked at me, and Mary Prentice said, you see the world in iridescence, which is awesome, but you've got to take that and translate it for people who see it in black and white. And that was like the coolest compliment and the most world-crushing comment I could have received. Below the line, some things, and things will crop up that you won't, because you're associative thinking, like my dad has Parkinson's, finding that out, one of my advisors left during the process, student going off the rails in final essay tirade, working, and then, so you can see how I've mapped these, and they're not chronological at all, they're just mapping associatively. When you map, this is basic color and emotion association, but when we start the process, what green means to me might not be the same as what green is to Annie or to Kristen. So the meaning to the color here is just kind of an introduction. A lot of mine, you'll see I ended up with warmer colors on top. The reading school-related stuff all ended up being kind of orange. I don't know, I have a heart there. I don't know if that was coding. So we'll use the color as a way to code. But however you attach a color to an emotion, it's a very personal thing. So, gray and black usually end up toward the bottom. So we'll go over the color in a moment. So there's more of my above the line. There's as we go below the line. So a few prompts for generating your map. First, you could recall a moment that you first read a passage or an article or a scholar or an author that shifted your thinking or blew your mind. I read, have any of you read, great, I'm gonna blank on A Wrinkle in Time. Has anybody read A Wrinkle in Time? I read it when I was in 4th grade. I think our teacher actually read it to us. And then I read it again 2 years ago, and I didn't realize how much of an effect that book had on me. What Kairos moments have happened in your personal or professional life that have affected your business or academic trajectory or professional trajectory? Perhaps a travel or a hike or a chance discussion with someone. Think serendipity. So there's patterns in everything. And we always think it's a coincidence, but I like to think it's not when I end up on a hike with somebody who said, oh, I just found the Stanford D-School guide last week. What can you tell me about that? Okay. What moments in your personal or professional life can you pinpoint that have shaped your being in some way? Discussions with colleagues or a mentor, a certain conference, a party. Sometimes I think when we have presentations, the receptions actually is where the Kairos moments happen. And think I told someone last time, I'm the last one to leave a party generally. So what ends up, your colors will become coding categories. What I suggest is to map in one color, to map in pen, or just in a single color, and then code with multiple colors. So this will avoid, and you can code at the same time. You can attach the emotion at the same time, the coding color at the same time, or you can map your whole map first and then go back and color code. So when you're mapping, and we'll have about 20 minutes, because again, it's this winding associative thinking, so I want to give people plenty of time. But based on the color, emotion, infographic, and your own associative thinking, code each of your moments with markers or colored pencils. I don't know if any of you want to try this. I think it's really fun. If you're so inclined, you may also assign a song to each of the moments in addition to color or instead of color. So it works the same way, because when we pull songs, we're pulling emotion. So I did do a whole map on just using, I think it was maybe when I was at Virginia Tech, I used music to code instead of color. Again, just associatively, not necessarily that the song is connected to the moment in some way, though it might be. And then I arranged it like I would a playlist, and then plugged the data back in. So that one's a little extra, but if you're something. Okay. So, does anybody have questions right now? Okay. So I'll be walking around, and we'll have I'll take about 20 minutes to start your maps. And what you'll start is to just start with your line, mark above the line or below the line. And again, consider your project if you have one in mind, but if you don't, this is where you could just come from your experience as a problem solver, which opens up a lot of pathways in the mind when you start to think of that. If you get stuck, if you can't think of anything, give yourself a second, space out for 60 seconds, and let your train of thought pick up again. Don't feel stressed if you're stuck for something. Just kind of relax and breathe and space out.
Awesome. So let me have one of those pages here.
No, So that's
I messed up. I have to start over. I promise to recycle this page.
problem there.
And I love blue, you can see it, right? Yeah. And I have no idea.
If you get to a point where you feel like you're done with the mapping section, feel free to take a 10-minute bathroom break and come back, and then we'll do the second part of it.
Lauren, do you think you could put the color, like your suggested kind of color map up on the screen?
Oh, sure, the color theory.
That's helpful, thank you.
Take about 3 or 4 more minutes and kind of finish up where you are. So one of the what's cool about this too is hopefully you were surprised a little bit when you were putting things down. There's kind of a mantra for writers: no surprise for the reader, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. So with story, if you wanted to, for instance, it would not generally occur that you would have all of your below the line moments in one story. If you've ever listened to somebody complain or like tell horrible, like you've been at a party and you're like, a reception, you're like, wow, this might be going down real quick. Same for, and actually in grant writing, so for example, the state of New Mexico has lots of statistics that work against it in ways. We have high rankings for things that we don't want to be high ranked for, and low rankings for things we don't want to be low ranked for. But it's really, in grant writing, we have to be really careful not to perpetuate stereotypes about the state, and to open up ourselves for the opportunities to say, but we can improve this, and look at the improvements that we've done. So we wouldn't ever front load a grant with every single negative statistic about the state of New Mexico. It wouldn't get, you remember that the people on the other side of the story, whether it's a grant, I think grants, especially a grant committee, a scholarship committee, that it's people reading a story. It's people reading your story. And I think we lose sight of that a lot because it becomes the board or the selection committee. And it's kind of the great and powerful Oz. And we forget that that person drove to work that day or commuted to work that day. They may or may not have had a good morning. And guess what? Like, based on whether or not they had a great day, their opinion of your piece might change, which is scary and kind of cool. So when for submitting stories, because I still am active in publishing, when I submit stories, I pretty much submit and forget. And we do it a little bit with grants, so we have more communication sometimes with granting organizations. But when I submit for publishing, I really have to just submit it and forget it, because we can't control how the person's going to interpret our story. But we can control how we tell the story and what we believe in. As far as rhetoric goes, and I would call rhetoric, it gets a lot of, it has a negative term, but my degree's in it. It's, rhetoric, I would say, is the design of thought, purposeful design in thought. So everything that we see from this PowerPoint to the poster to, somebody picked out the paint colors for the walls, everything is done purposefully. And so that's where we get to make the choices on what we want people to see in our stories. So for this part, you'll consider your audience and your situation. Generally, what you have mapped completely out, you probably won't use all of your points in your story. Alex, can I pick on you for a second? Did you use your potential memoir as
yeah.
Okay. So, like, if you're working on something that's a memoir, if you've read a memoir, watched a documentary, you still, even if it's a really compelling memoir and you have the space of 200 pages, you can bet that so much is left out on in an edit. We can't ever tell our entire story, and this is to help you think, to purposefully design and think of how you tell your story, because if you've ever been somewhere, actually it happens, I should do one just for Arrowhead, actually for Arrowhead as the organization, because I'm really confident and I love talking to people, and they'll say, so tell me about Arrowhead, and I'm like, so many things. I'll usually say, tell me about yourself, what do you do? And then that's a way for me to try and see how they could fit with our organization. But it can kind of throw you off if someone says tell us your story. So if it's for a pitch, for instance, if you only have a very short, like an elevator pitch in front of somebody, you might use 2 of these points. and then fill in, or maybe three's, I like odd numbers, 3, and you have your connecting points. And we'll look at this. This is the most used and compelling story arc that in existence in Western civilization. This, here they use Cinderella as the example, and that's what Kurt Vonnegut calls it as well. You have, starting out, here we have ill fortune and good fortune beginning and end. So in Cinderella's story, and this is the story that the scientists that did the study also found that this is what people want to hear. So we have, you might have started out here and you didn't know what you were doing, and you could have had setbacks, you learned from it, you had something great happen, and then, oh my gosh, you figured out that your entire business plan is not doable. So here we have to pivot, because the people that we thought we're going to sell to, we were going to sell our product to, we found out that they actually can't use that product at all. So we have to figure something else out. So we're below the line a little bit here. We're figuring it out. And then we have a revelation, some kind of kairos moment that pushes us up to good fortune, infinity forever. I would argue, and there are variations, that especially if you're pitching, you don't want to say that, like, probably that you're the best, you already have everything. You're not gonna end your story here. You're gonna end somewhere here. We're coming up, and right now we need funding to get to here. Then there's some stories that just take, like the person at the party in the example I used earlier. It never gets any better. It's pretty dark the whole time, or a Wagner opera or something. It just is. It's just not good for grants. Not good for proposals, not good for pitches, for parties. Not good for parties. But you can see, I mean, Kafka is Kafka. There are some stories, and a lot of times that's, I was talking with Annie about mythology earlier. I taught mythology here at some time as well. And it's sometimes stories like that are to teach a lesson. You know, they show up in mythology. And of course, Kafka, it's a lesson. It's a lesson about existential lesson about human existence, or some such. But we don't want ill fortune forever. This is the results of that study I was talking about. So this is the 6 main story arcs, and this is what I'll have you use to vaguely plot your points from your map. The top story arc is rags to riches. So you can see, the pointer doesn't work, it's just like, you can see the variances. Some stories, they all have their own track, but we have the rags to riches. We have someone starting at a low point, and this is percentage of the book. So as the book goes, we have the riches. The second one is it's called Man in a Hole. So this is somebody who, this is a riches to rags to riches. So someone who started out with a whole lot. We get a lot of these stories in entrepreneurship. Somebody who started out, actually, might be more like, but we have this in entrepreneurship. Maybe someone started out and they just had a lot of good fortune, a lot of hard work. Everything really came together for them in kairos moments, and then they might have lost everything. Or someone who lost everything in the stock market and figured out how to rebuild. We have, that's Man in a Hole. Cinderella, which I showed you on that last one in a little bit different form, is things are kind of bad starting out. We have things get better, things get way worse, and then they get better. Oedipus.
Isn't that tragedy?
Yeah. So, I'm sorry, tragedy. This is tragedy. So things are okay, things are going great, and then it's a Shakespeare tragedy, and all your characters at the end are lying face down on the stage. That's tragedy. This is Oedipus. Things start out okay, things get really great. Oedipus is a great example of kairotic and not kairotic moments. And we have where it ends again in tragedy. So you have the up and down. And then this is called Icarus, the myth of Icarus. So you have, it's the inverse of Cinderella. So generally what we use for stories, again, what I would recommend to use is this one. Now, again, your end probably won't be up here. I hope your end is up there. I hope for everybody that that's where you have good fortune forever and ever. The most compelling story, or the one that you can fall back on, is that. And with your maps, you can choose any point to start, is what's really cool. I am a big fan, if you think of any movie, starting in the middle of things, in media res is the term of it, but you know, starting in the middle of things. And I think I use the example of my students, if a story starts in the middle of a bar fight. You have the players, you have the setting, you have the character, and hopefully none of your maps start with a bar fight. But we have the bar fight at the beginning, and it kind of we have this ill fortune happening, and then we have our main character that goes through things that are happening that might be good or bad. So you can pick any of your points to start your map, and I'll actually put it back. I think. Well, which one's more helpful to look at? So this would be Rags to Riches, which is a good one to use. Man and a Whole Cinderella. You'll probably use mostly these ones up here for your stories. If you're pitching a grant, if you're pitching, if you're writing a grant, if you're writing a story, anything that you want someone to be hooked into, your safest bet are doing these 3 story arcs. So what I would recommend now, and you can kind of sketch those arcs down and work on them later as well. But I would see just now, where would you plot? Now this goes back to mapping data. Where would you plot your data points to tell your story? Where does your data fall along that line? And so I will, let's work on that for just about 5 or 10 minutes and just kind of get an idea of where your story might be going using the arc. And then we'll conclude in comments and talk a little bit about what we did here.
So were you wanting another piece of paper?
No, there. So we're just mapping from one side.
We're putting the data points that we have on this and onto one of these arcs, whatever makes sense, or however we want to present that.
Probably like 5 to 7 presenting them. I mean, you could do more, but and it might just be a teacher member. mess with your art, and I mean, you can just loosely map it over the top of your points, or and then just have a brief discussion. The number 6 is Icarus. It follows the myth of Icarus. Probably I'm sure this. Yeah, well, oh, that's a good point. Yeah. So here's the deal, and like with any teaching, Pete brought up a great, good point about that you're going to have, think of if you've read any series like Harry Potter, Stephen King's Dark Tower series, or even something shorter than that, even a grant proposal actually, you have some multiple arcs going on, but generally they'll follow one large story arc. But if you think of, I think Harry Potter, actually in the study they talk about Harry Potter as an example. There's so many plot lines going on, but overall you could do a very simple map of what the story arc looks like from beginning to end. But you'll have those, and that's what makes the tension in a story, is those side moments happening, like all those moments connecting. So how did it turn out? Was anybody surprised by how the map turned out? Did it start somewhere and end somewhere unexpected? What would, if someone was to use a point as the beginning of their story, what would your point be? Is anybody willing to share their, like, what would they use as their starting point? Yeah,
when I first moved to Las Cruces, I moved into my new apartment, which I was very excited about. However, one night I got back home and there was a frog inside my apartment. The reason why there was a frog inside my apartment was because the door was like 2 inches apart from the ground. So it was the good and the bad and everything in between. So that's the starting point of my story. I found a frog inside my apartment.
That's a great place to start. Does anybody else they want to share?
I just mapped to stay away from work things, I mapped my musical experience. Mm-hmm. So mine starts with a Barbra Streisand 8-track and a Mr. Microphone and a fireplace door.
Awesome! Both of those, I would read the rest of that story. Mine was riding in the car. I decided to map my siblings because I have a whole bunch of them. And I never know quite how to write about them. And so my starting point was one time two of my siblings and I were riding in the car, kind of talking negatively about our other brother. And Erin said, "Oh, my cell phone's ringing." And she picked it up and it was Sean. He's like, "I can hear you guys. Somebody's phone is on. I can totally hear you guys talking about it." So that would be the beginning of my sibling mapping. So I think finding your point that you could start with, and really you could pick anything to start. That's where you're going to think of your story, of how you're going to. It'll be an intricate process to map the rest of it, but you can use these arcs. You can go. I like the maps because you can go back to them, and it gives you a place to start if you're looking to start. The other thing I would recommend is when you have a project, you can do this in short form. You don't have to have an hour and a half. If you have a project where you have to come up with a story, you can do that above the line, below the line, map your moments, and kind of chart them. And ideally, like I was telling Carrie, we've both taught English for a long time, we always tell our students, well, really what you want to do is you want to write. This is why you don't write an essay the night before you write it. You set it aside, you give your mind time to work, and then you come back to it. Well, we have a grant right now that came out on, the call was on April 26th, and the proposal's due May 2nd. So that doesn't leave a lot of room. It's super creative. So I'm like, hey, fun. It has a word count. It's like poetry. So it kind of, that doesn't give you, when you have a call for a grant that's, you know, a month or two out, and it gives you time to structure, get meetings together. This is, you need to map what you're going to say. Kathy's a fan of storyboarding. Storyboarding is similar. What you're going to say and where it's going to appear in the proposal. So this mapping technique can get you to your story a little bit faster if you have to produce faster. Probably for journalism too. If you have a big story and you need to get a press release out, it's like, what do I say? And you have an entire map to choose from, and just picking those points. Any closing? I hope I hit everything I was going to. Thank you so much for coming. This is really great. Thank you so much for your time. And I have business cards. Feel free to stay in touch. I know a handful of you, but I'm always here and I'm always available by email or phone. So thank you so much. Uh-oh. She's like,